Picture this. You're at the city's most exclusive charity gala, surrounded by millionaires in designer gowns and $1,000 suits. Everything looks perfect. The crystal chandeliers, the champagne, the polite laughter of high society. But when a pregnant woman accidentally spills her drink, her CEO husband's whispered words cut through the elegant atmosphere like a knife. "Don't you dare embarrass me in front of these people." What happens next will expose the dark truth hiding behind their perfect facade. A truth so shocking that it leads to FBI investigations, public confrontations, and a desperate fight for survival that plays out in hospital rooms, courtrooms, and the pages of tomorrow's headlines. This is the story of Rebecca, a woman who thought she'd married her Prince Charming, only to discover she'd walked into a nightmare dressed in Armani suits and hidden behind penthouse walls. It's a story about what happens when the mask finally slips, when perfect appearances crumble, and when a mother must choose between the luxury she's known and the safety her children desperately need. But I'm warning you now, once you start listening to the story, you won't be able to stop. Because what begins with a spilled drink at a charity gala becomes a race against time, a battle for justice, and ultimately a testament to the incredible strength of the human spirit. So settle in, because you're about to hear a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat from the very first whisper to the final courtroom verdict. And trust me, you've never heard anything quite like this before. Don't you dare embarrass me in front of these people. John's voice was a whisper that cut through the charity gala like a blade. Rebecca Ann Sullivan forced her brightest smile and nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her 7-month pregnant belly. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and designer gowns, filled with the city's most influential families gathered for the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser. To everyone watching, she and her CEO husband, Jonathan Whitmore, appeared to be the perfect power couple. "Of course, sweetheart," Becca whispered back, adjusting the diamond necklace that suddenly felt too tight around her throat. Emma Grace Sullivan, her 9-year-old daughter from her previous marriage, sat at their assigned table near the stage, carefully coloring in the event program with crayons she'd smuggled in her small purse. The child had learned to make herself invisible at these corporate events, understanding somehow that silence was safety. John straightened his black tie tuxedo and placed his hand possessively on the small of Becca's back, guiding her toward a group of potential investors. His technology company, Whitmore Systems, was always hunting for new capital, and tonight's guest list read like a directory of venture capitalists and hedge fund managers. "Jonathan, wonderful to see you," called Mayor Patricia Collins from across the room. "And Becca, you look absolutely radiant. How much longer now?" "2 months," Becca replied, her voice warm and practiced. "We're so excited." John's grip on her back tightened almost imperceptibly. They both knew this pregnancy hadn't been planned, and his enthusiasm was purely for public consumption. In private, he'd made it clear that another child was an inconvenience, especially Emma, who reminded him daily that Becca had a life before him. "We should mingle," John murmured against her ear, his breath hot and demanding. "The Peterson Group is here tonight. I need you to charm Mrs. Peterson while I talk numbers with her husband." Becca nodded obediently, but her feet were already swelling in the designer heels John had insisted she wear. The black maternity gown, while elegant, was beginning to feel restrictive as the evening wore on. She caught Emma's eye across the room and smiled reassuringly at her daughter, who was watching with the careful attention of a child who'd learned to read adult moods for survival. As they approached the Peterson table, John's phone buzzed insistently. He checked it with the obsessive frequency that had become his trademark over the past few months. His jaw tightened as he read the message, and Becca felt the familiar knot of anxiety form in her stomach. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly. "Just business," he snapped, then immediately softened his tone as Mrs. Peterson looked their way. "Darling, let me introduce you to Margaret Peterson. Margaret, this is my beautiful wife, Rebecca." For the next hour, Becca performed the role of perfect corporate wife with practiced ease. She asked interested questions about the Peterson Family Foundation, complimented Margaret's jewelry, and shared carefully edited stories about their home life that painted John as a devoted husband and stepfather. But she couldn't ignore the growing tension in John's shoulders, or the way his responses became increasingly sharp when anyone mentioned market volatility or recent changes in the tech sector. His phone continued buzzing, and each message seemed to darken his mood further. The trouble began when they moved to the silent auction tables. Becca had always enjoyed charity events, genuinely caring about the causes they supported. As she examined a vacation package to Italy, she felt a sudden craving for the sparkling cider being served at a nearby station. "I'll be right back," she told John, who was deep in conversation with a group of investors about quarterly projections and market expansion. The server handed her a crystal glass filled with golden cider, and Becca took a grateful sip. The baby had been particularly active today, and the combination of standing for hours and the warm ballroom was taking its toll. As she turned to rejoin John, someone bumped into her from behind. The glass slipped from her hand, splashing cider down the front of her black gown before shattering on the marble floor. The liquid spread across the expensive fabric, creating a dark stain that seemed to glow under the chandeliers. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry!" exclaimed the woman who'd accidentally bumped her, a red-faced donor who clearly had too much champagne. "I'm such a klutz. Let me help you clean that up." "It's fine, really," Becca assured her, dabbing at the stain with a cocktail napkin. "These things happen." "Wake him," but even as she spoke, she could feel John's eyes boring into her from across the room. When she looked up, his expression was thunderous. He excused himself from his conversation and strode toward her, with the purposeful walk she'd learned to fear. "What did you do?" he hissed under his breath, maintaining his public smile while gripping her arm just above the elbow. "Someone bumped into me. It was an accident," she whispered back, trying to keep her voice light and untroubled for the benefit of the people around them. "You're always so careless," he said, his fingers digging into her arm. "Do you have any idea how this looks? The Peterson group is watching, and you're stumbling around like a drunk." "John, please, you're hurting me." Emma had noticed the commotion and approached their table, her coloring book clutched against her chest. "Mama, are you okay? I have some napkins in my purse if you need them." The 9-year-old's offer of help seemed to infuriate John further. He released Becca's arm and turned his attention to Emma, his voice taking on the cold, controlled tone that meant real danger. "Emma, go back to your seat and finish your coloring. Adults are talking." "But I just wanted to help Mama with her dress." "I said go sit down." John's voice carried enough menace to make several nearby guests glance in their direction. Children should be seen and not heard at events like this. Emma's face crumpled, but she obediently returned to their table, shooting worried looks at her mother over her shoulder. Becca watched her daughter retreat and felt something inside her chest crack. Emma had done nothing wrong except try to help, and John's public humiliation of the child was cruel and unnecessary. "That was uncalled for," Becca said quietly, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. John's smile never wavered, but his eyes went flat and dangerous. "We'll discuss your opinions about my parenting when we get home. Right now, you need to go to the ladies' room and clean yourself up. We have important people to impress tonight." As Becca made her way to the restroom, she caught her reflection in the ornate mirrors that lined the hotel corridor. The woman staring back looked polished and successful, but her eyes held a weariness that no amount of makeup could conceal. She touched her belly gently, whispering to the baby growing inside her. "I'm going to do better for you," she promised, "for both of you." In the ladies' room, she dabbed cold water on the stain and tried to convince herself that John was just stressed about work. His company had been facing some challenges lately, and she knew how much pressure he felt to maintain their lifestyle and social standing. The pregnancy hormones were making her overly sensitive to his moods. But as she returned to the ballroom, she saw John checking his phone again, his face grim. When he looked up at her approach, there was something in his expression she'd never seen before, something that made her blood run cold. "We're leaving," he announced, standing abruptly and tossing his napkin on the table. "Something's come up at work." As they collected Emma and made their way to the valet stand, Becca tried to maintain the facade of gracious departure. She thanked their hosts, complimented the organization, and promised to attend next year's event. But John's hand remained on her back, steering her with increasing pressure toward the exit. The valet brought their black Mercedes to the curb, and John tipped him with the mechanical precision of a man whose mind was elsewhere. As they settled into the leather seats, Emma buckled herself in the back and immediately resumed her careful silence. The elevator ride to their penthouse felt endless. John stood rigid beside her, his jaw working as he stared at the floor numbers. Emma pressed herself against the far wall, clutching her coloring book like a shield. When the doors opened, John's mask finally slipped entirely. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me tonight?" he snarled, his voice echoing off the marble walls of their foyer. The Peterson Group was ready to discuss a major investment, and instead they watched my pregnant wife stumble around like a drunken fool. "John, I explained what happened. It was an accident." "There are no accidents with you, Rebecca. There's only carelessness and poor judgment and a complete failure to understand what's at stake here." Emma hurried toward the stairs, but John's voice stopped her. "Where do you think you're going?" "To my room," she said in a small voice. "Did I give you permission to leave?" The 9-year-old shook her head, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Becca stepped forward, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. "John, she's tired. It's late for a school night." "Don't tell me how to handle discipline in my own house," he snapped. "Emma, come here." The child approached slowly, her coloring book trembling in her hands. When she was within reach, John snatched the book away and flipped through the pages she'd worked on so carefully during the gala. "Look at this mess," he said, showing the pages to Becca. "She colored outside the lines, used the wrong colors for the hospital logo, completely ignored the instructions. Is this the kind of attention to detail you're teaching her?" "She's 9 years old," Becca said, her voice stronger than she felt. "She was being quiet and well-behaved all evening." John's eyes narrowed dangerously. She was being disruptive and attention-seeking, just like her mother. He dropped the coloring book on the floor, its pages scattering across the expensive hardwood. Emma's careful work lay crumpled and dismissed, and the child's face crumpled along with it. "Now go to your room," John commanded, "and think about how your behavior tonight reflected on this family." Emma scrambled to collect her scattered drawings, tears flowing freely now. As she headed upstairs, Becca moved to help her, but John's voice cracked like a whip. "Leave it. She made the mess. She can clean it up." Alone with John in the vast foyer, Becca felt the familiar sensation of the walls closing in around her. This was her life now, walking on eggshells and apologizing for existing. Watching her daughter learn that love came with impossible conditions and constant criticism. "We need to talk," John said, loosening his bow tie with sharp, angry movements. "About your behavior tonight, about your priorities, and about some changes that are going to happen around here." As he stalked toward his home office, Becca remained frozen in the foyer, surrounded by the scattered remains of Emma's artwork. The drawings looked like autumn leaves, colorful and innocent and trampled underfoot. She knelt slowly, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward, and began collecting the pages with careful hands. In the margins of one drawing, Emma had written in careful 9-year-old script, "I love you, Mama. You're the best mommy ever." Becca pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes, feeling the baby move restlessly inside her. Upstairs, she could hear Emma crying quietly in her bedroom. Down the hall, John was slamming drawers and muttering angrily to himself. This was the moment that would later seem like the calm before the storm, the last few minutes of their old life before everything changed forever. Becca folded Emma's drawing carefully and tucked it into her evening bag, not knowing she was preserving evidence of a childhood that was about to be shattered beyond repair. The perfect facade was beginning to crack, and what lay underneath would shock everyone who thought they knew the Whitmore family. The elevator doors had barely closed before John's mask slipped completely. The polite smile he'd maintained throughout the charity gala vanished, replaced by an expression of cold fury that made Becca instinctively step back against the mirrored wall. "Do you have any idea what tonight cost me?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low. 6 months of cultivation, 6 months of careful networking, and you destroyed it all with your clumsy performance. Emma pressed herself into the corner, clutching her coloring book like a shield. The child had learned to read these moods, understanding that her stepfather's anger was like a storm system that could shift direction without warning. "John, it was just a spilled drink," Becca said quietly, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "These things happen at crowded events." "These things happen to careless people," he corrected, his CEO persona bleeding through even in his rage. "People who don't understand that every moment, every interaction, every gesture is being evaluated by people who control our future." The elevator climbed toward their penthouse, each floor number illuminating like a countdown. Becca had once loved this building, their home in the sky with its panoramic city views and luxury amenities. Now the elevator felt like a cage, carrying them higher and further away from help. The Peterson Group was ready to discuss a $12 million investment, John continued, his voice growing louder despite Emma's presence. $12 million, Rebecca. Do you understand what that means for Whitmore Systems? For our lifestyle? For your precious daughter's private school tuition? I understand it's important, Becca replied, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable. But surely one small incident won't derail an entire business relationship? John's laugh was bitter. You really don't understand how this world works, do you? Margaret Peterson spent 20 minutes telling her friends about your little scene. By tomorrow morning, half the city will have heard about Jonathan Whitmore's pregnant wife stumbling around drunk at a charity event. I wasn't drunk. I was drinking sparkling cider. It doesn't matter what you were drinking. It matters what it looked like, what people think they saw, what story they'll tell at their next dinner party. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and John strode into their foyer with the aggressive energy of a caged animal. The penthouse, with its soaring ceilings and museum-quality art, felt oppressive in the wake of his fury. Emma, go to your room, he commanded without looking at the child. But Daddy John, I wanted to show Mama my coloring. I said go to your room. His voice carried the kind of authority that brooked no argument. Adults need to discuss adult matters. Emma shot a worried glance at her mother before hurrying up the curved staircase, her small feet making whisper-soft sounds on the marble steps. Becca watched her daughter retreat and felt her heart break a little more. Emma shouldn't have to live in fear of adult emotions, shouldn't have to hide in her room whenever tensions rose. Alone with John, Becca tried to diffuse the situation. I know you're stressed about work, but taking it out on Emma isn't fair. She's just a little girl. She's your little girl, John corrected sharply, and she's a constant reminder to everyone we meet that you had a whole life before me, complete with poor choices and questionable judgment. The words hit Becca like physical blows. Emma's father had died in a car accident when she was 3, leaving Becca to raise her daughter alone until John entered their lives 2 years ago. He'd seemed like a savior then, offering stability and security after years of struggle. Emma isn't a poor choice, Becca said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. She's my daughter, and she's part of this family whether you like it or not. John's eyes went flat and dangerous. This family exists because I built it, I fund it, and I maintain it. Everyone in this house lives here at my discretion, including you and your daughter. He moved to the bar cart and poured himself 3 fingers of expensive scotch, downing half of it in a single swallow. The alcohol seemed to calm him slightly, but Becca knew it also made him more unpredictable. The pregnancy wasn't planned, he continued, settling into his leather armchair like a king holding court. We both know that, but I accepted it because I thought it would complete our image, give us the perfect nuclear family that investors and clients expect to see. Our baby isn't a public relations strategy, Becca said, her hand moving protectively to her belly. She's a human being who deserves to be wanted and loved. She? John's eyebrows raised. When did you find out the gender? I thought we agreed to wait until the birth. Becca's heart sank as she realized her slip. They had agreed to wait, but her doctor had accidentally revealed the information during her last appointment. She'd been planning to surprise John with the news when he was in a better mood. It was an accident. Dr. Brooks mentioned it during the ultrasound, and I didn't want to interrupt her. So you kept it from me, made unilateral decisions about our family without consulting me. John finished his scotch and poured another. Just like you made unilateral decisions tonight about how to behave at the gala. I didn't make any decisions. I had an accident. I apologized. I handled it as gracefully as possible. Gracefully? John's laugh was sharp and humorless. You created a scene that had half the room staring at us. You drew attention to yourself at the exact moment I needed to be discussing business with the Peterson Group. Then you contradicted my parenting decisions in front of Emma, undermining my authority in my own house. Becca sank into the sofa, the weight of the evening and her pregnancy making her legs unsteady. The baby was moving restlessly, as if sensing her mother's distress. 7 months along, And already this child was learning that home wasn't necessarily a safe place. I'm tired, John. It's been a long evening, and the baby is pressing on my ribs. Can we continue this conversation tomorrow when we're both calmer? Oh, we're far from finished, John said, standing and beginning to pace. Tomorrow morning, the business section will run photos from tonight's gala. Everyone who matters in this city will see those pictures and remember your little performance. His phone buzzed insistently, and John checked it with the obsessive frequency that had become his signature behavior over the past few months. Whatever he read on the screen made his face go pale, then flush red with renewed anger. Perfect. Just perfect. He held up the phone, showing her a text message. That's my assistant, warning me that someone already posted photos on social media. Look at this. Becca squinted at the screen, seeing a blurry image of herself dabbing at the stain on her dress, while John stood nearby with a concerned expression. To most people, it would look like a minor mishap handled with grace. I don't understand what's wrong with this picture, she said honestly. What's wrong is that it exists at all. We shouldn't be memorable for the wrong reasons. We should blend in, project success and stability, not create moments that people feel compelled to photograph and share. John's phone buzzed again, and this time his reaction was explosive. He hurled the device against the marble fireplace, where it shattered into pieces, the screen splintering like a spiderweb. 16 years, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. 16 years I've been building Whitmore systems, creating something that matters, something that will last. And you managed to potentially destroy it in one careless moment. John, you're scaring me. And you're going to wake Emma. Let her wake up. Let her see what happens when people don't think before they act, when they put their selfish needs ahead of family loyalty. The alcohol was clearly affecting him now, making his movements loose and unpredictable. Becca had seen him drink before, but never with this kind of desperate edge. Something else was wrong, something beyond her accident at the gala. Is there something else bothering you? She asked carefully. Something about work that you haven't told me? John's laugh was bitter. Work. Yes, let's talk about work, shall we? Let's talk about how everything I've built's hanging by a thread. And tonight was my last chance to secure the funding that could save it all. What do you mean, hanging by a thread? I thought the company was doing well. You thought? John's voice dripped with contempt. You thought because I let you think that. Because I protected you from the reality of what it takes to maintain this lifestyle, this house, Emma's private school, your designer clothes, your comfortable ignorance of how the world actually works. Becca felt cold dread settling in her chest. John, what's happening with the company? What's happening is that 3 major clients pulled their contracts last month. What's happening is that our lead developer jumped ship to a competitor, taking half our proprietary code with him. What's happening is that I have exactly 30 days to find new investors, or Whitmore Systems goes under, taking our house, our cars, our entire life with it. The revelation hit Becca like a physical blow. Everything she'd thought she knew about their financial security was built on lies and deception. The pregnancy, which had already felt overwhelming, now seemed like a catastrophic mistake. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. We could have faced this together, made adjustments, found solutions. Solutions? John's voice rose dangerously. The only solution is to find investors willing to bet millions on a company led by a CEO whose personal life is a disaster. Tonight was my chance to convince the Peterson Group that I'm a stable, reliable leader worth backing. Instead, they saw a man who can't even control his pregnant wife at a charity gala. Upstairs, Emma's bedroom door creaked open, and they could hear small footsteps on the marble landing. The 9-year-old appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, her face worried and sleep-rumpled. Mama, is everything okay? I heard shouting. Go back to bed, Emma, Becca called softly. Everything's fine. But John was beyond caring about the child's presence or feelings. No, Emma, everything is not fine. Your mother's carelessness tonight may have cost our family everything we've worked for. Everything that pays for your school, your clothes, your comfortable little life. John, stop, Becca pleaded, struggling to rise from the sofa. She doesn't need to hear this. She needs to understand consequences, John shot back. She needs to learn that actions have repercussions, that families succeed or fail based on everyone doing their part. Emma crept down a few more steps, her child's instinct to comfort her mother overriding her fear of John's anger. Mama, I'm sorry I colored outside the lines. I didn't mean to make Daddy John mad. No, the innocence of the statement seemed to infuriate John further. This isn't about your coloring, Emma. This is about your mother's inability to behave appropriately in public, her failure to understand that everything we do reflects on this family. I said I'm sorry, Emma whispered, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. Sorry doesn't fix broken trust. Sorry doesn't restore lost opportunities. Sorry is just a word people use when they've already destroyed something precious. Becca had heard enough. Rising awkwardly from the sofa, she moved toward the stairs where Emma waited. That's enough, John. You've made your point. Emma, come on. Let me tuck you back into bed. But John stepped between them, his bulk blocking Becca's path to her daughter. I'm not finished. We haven't discussed the changes that are going to happen around here. Starting tomorrow. What changes? For starters, you're going to call everyone we met tonight and apologize for your behavior. You're going to explain that the pregnancy has made you clumsy and emotional, and that you're mortified by the scene you caused. I will not apologize for having an accident. You will apologize, or you and Emma can find somewhere else to live while you figure out how to support 2 children on whatever job skills you think you possess. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Becca knew John controlled all their finances, that she had no savings of her own, no family nearby to turn to for help. With a baby coming and Emma's stability to consider, she felt trapped by circumstances that seemed to tighten around her like a noose. You can't throw us out, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I can do whatever I want. This is my house, bought with my money, maintained by my success. You live here because I allow it, and that permission can be revoked at any time. Emma had crept halfway down the stairs, drawn by her need to protect her mother, despite her terror of John's rage. Please don't make us leave, she whispered. I'll be better, I promise. I'll color exactly right next time. John's attention turned to the child with laser focus. You want to stay, Emma? Then you need to understand the rules. No more interrupting adult conversations. No more drawing attention to yourself at public events. No more making messes that your mother has to clean up. Yes, sir, Emma said in a small voice. And you need to convince your mother to start acting like a proper wife instead of an embarrassment waiting to happen. Becca felt something inside her chest crack and break. This was the moment she would later identify as the beginning of the end, when John's mask slipped so completely that even her denial couldn't reconstruct it. Go to bed, Emma, she said firmly. Right now. The child scurried up the stairs, her bare feet pattering against the marble like raindrops. When her bedroom door clicked shut, Becca turned back to John, with tears streaming down her face. How did we get here? She whispered. How did you become someone who terrorizes a 9-year-old child to make a point? I became someone who does whatever it takes to protect what matters, John replied coldly. The question is whether you're going to help me save our family, or whether you're going to keep destroying it one careless moment at a time. As he stalked toward his home office, leaving Becca alone in the vast foyer, she pressed both hands to her belly and whispered to the baby growing inside her. The child deserved better than this house full of fear and conditional love. They all did. But John's threats echoed in her mind as she climbed the stairs toward Emma's room. Where would they go? How would she support 2 children with no job, no savings, no family network to fall back on? The pregnancy made everything more complicated, more urgent. Outside Emma's door, she paused to listen. The child was crying quietly into her pillow, trying to muffle the sound so as not to attract more anger. Becca's heart shattered as she realized what their home had become, what lessons Emma was learning about love and family and her own worth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new demands, new evidence that their perfect facade was crumbling from within. But tonight, she would hold her daughter and whisper promises she wasn't sure she could keep, while the baby inside her rolled and kicked as if already trying to escape the poisonous atmosphere that had become their daily reality. The wealthy CEO husband's true nature was finally revealed, and the pregnant wife was beginning to understand the depth of the trap she'd walked into with her eyes wide shut. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors where Emma's scattered artwork had been carefully collected and hidden away. Becca sat at the breakfast table, nursing a cup of herbal tea and watching her daughter methodically eat her cereal in silence. The 9-year-old had dark circles under her eyes, evidence of a restless night spent listening for adult voices through her bedroom door. She kept glancing toward John's home office, where the sound of his voice on conference calls had been steadily rising in volume and intensity since 6 in the morning. "Did you sleep okay, baby?" Becca asked softly, reaching across the table to smooth Emma's tangled hair. Emma nodded unconvincingly, then whispered, "Is Daddy John still mad about the coloring book?" Before Becca could answer, John's voice exploded from behind his office door, loud enough to make both of them jump. "What do you mean the accounts are frozen? That's impossible." Becca's blood ran cold. Frozen accounts could only mean one thing: serious legal trouble. She rose awkwardly from her chair, her pregnant belly making every movement deliberate, and moved toward the office door. "No, you listen to me," John was shouting into his phone. "I built this company from nothing. I've never done anything illegal, and I resent the implication that, what? Since when?" The conversation continued, but his voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Becca pressed her ear to the door, her heart pounding as fragments of John's words filtered through. FBI investigation, embezzlement allegations, immediate audit of all financial records. When the office door suddenly swung open, Becca stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance. John stood in the doorway, his face ashen and his perfectly styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "How long have you been listening?" he demanded. I heard shouting and wanted to make sure you were okay." John's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Okay? Nothing is okay. Nothing will ever be okay again, and it's all your fault." "My fault? John, what's happening? What's this about the FBI?" He pushed past her into the main living area, his movements jerky and unpredictable. Emma had abandoned her breakfast and was hovering near the kitchen doorway, her young face tight with worry. 3 years, John said, more to himself than to Becca. 3 years of creative accounting, moving money between departments, borrowing against future contracts to maintain cash flow. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. The word embezzlement hit Becca like a physical blow. "You've been stealing from your own company?" "I've been managing resources to keep us afloat," John corrected angrily. "Keeping this lifestyle going, keeping Emma in private school, maintaining the image that attracts investors. Everything I did was for this family. By breaking the law, by doing whatever was necessary." John's voice reached a dangerous pitch. "Do you think this house pays for itself? Do you think your designer maternity clothes grow on trees? I've been juggling creditors and investigators and failed product launches for months, all while pretending everything was perfect." Becca sank onto the sofa, her mind reeling. The charity gala, the pressure to impress investors, his explosive anger over her accident. It all made horrible sense now. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that federal agents are freezing our business accounts. Bad enough that 3 of my top executives are hiring criminal defense attorneys. Bad enough that the Peterson Group investment I needed to save everything is now impossible because who wants to invest in a company under FBI investigation?" Emma crept closer, her child's instinct to comfort the adults in her life overriding her fear. "Maybe the police will understand it was a mistake," she offered in her sweet 9-year-old voice. John's attention snapped to the child with frightening intensity. "Mistake? There was no mistake, Emma. Your mother's performance last night guaranteed that every potential investor in this city will run from Whitmore Systems like it's radioactive. John, she's 9 years old. She doesn't understand. She understands enough to know that actions have consequences, something you never learned." The stress was making Becca's pregnancy symptoms worse. She felt dizzy and nauseous, and the baby was moving restlessly inside her, as if sensing the toxic emotions filling the room. "I need to sit down properly. My back is killing me." "Your back," John repeated mockingly. "Your comfort, your needs. Always about you, isn't it, Rebecca?" As Becca struggled to find a comfortable position on the sofa, a new wave of pain struck her lower abdomen. This wasn't the usual pregnancy discomfort. These were contractions, sharp and rhythmic. "John," she said, her voice tight with pain and growing panic, "something's wrong. I'm having contractions." Of course you are. Perfect timing, as always. I'm serious. These aren't Braxton Hicks contractions. I think the stress is triggering early labor. Emma approached cautiously, her small hands reaching toward her mother's belly. Is the baby coming now, Mama? I don't know, sweetheart, but I think we need to go to the hospital. Becca expected John to immediately spring into action, to help her to the car and drive her to the emergency room. Instead, he remained frozen by the windows, staring out at the city skyline with an expression of cold calculation. We can't go to the hospital, he said finally. What do you mean we can't go? I might be in premature labor. I mean we can't be seen in public right now. The FBI investigation will be all over the news by this afternoon. Every reporter in the city will be looking for photo opportunities, human interest angles, family drama to spice up their financial crime stories. Another contraction gripped Becca, stronger than the last. She doubled over, gripping the arm of the sofa with white knuckles. I don't care about reporters. I care about this baby. Well, I care about not spending the next 20 years in federal prison, John shot back. If investigators see me rushing my pregnant wife to the hospital, they'll paint it as a sympathy play, evidence that I'm trying to manipulate public opinion. Emma's eyes were huge with fear and confusion. But what if something bad happens to the baby? John turned on the child with vicious intensity. What if something bad happens to our entire family because your mother can't handle stress without creating drama? That's enough, Becca gasped, struggling to stand. Emma, go pack a bag for yourself and one for me. Include my prenatal vitamins and that list of important phone numbers on my dresser. You're not going anywhere, John said, moving to block her path to the stairs. I am going to the hospital, with or without you. For the first time in their relationship, Becca's voice carried absolute finality. The contractions were coming closer together now, and she could feel her body preparing for labor, whether it was time or not. Nothing mattered except getting medical attention for herself and the baby. John's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally cold resolve. Fine. Go to the hospital. Expose our family to media scrutiny at the worst possible time. But don't expect me to be there holding your hand while you destroy what's left of our reputation. I expect you to care more about your unborn daughter than your public image, Becca replied. But even as she said the words, she knew they were futile. Emma returned with hastily packed overnight bags, her young face set in lines of determination that broke Becca's heart. At 9 years old, she was already learning to be the responsible adult in crisis situations. I called a taxi, Emma announced quietly. I remembered how you showed me to use the house phone for emergencies. The simple competence of her daughter in this moment of adult failure nearly brought Becca to tears. You're so smart, baby, so brave. John watched these preparations with the detached interest of someone observing strangers. When this all falls apart, he said conversationally, when the FBI seizes this house and freezes every account, when you're living in some subsidized apartment trying to raise 2 children on food stamps, remember that you chose this path. Another contraction doubled Becca over, and Emma instinctively moved to support her mother's weight with her small frame. The taxi honked from the street below, and Becca knew she was out of time for arguments or explanations. Come on, Mama, Emma said, shouldering both overnight bags with the serious efficiency of a tiny adult. The baby needs a doctor. As they made their way slowly toward the elevator, John's voice followed them from the living room. Don't think this changes anything between us, Rebecca. You belong to me, and so does that baby. Hospital or no hospital, FBI investigation or no investigation, you're still my wife, and you'll do what I tell you to do. The elevator doors closed on his words, but they seemed to echo in the enclosed space as they descended toward the street. Emma held Becca's hand tightly, her young face pale but determined. It's going to be okay, Mama, she whispered. The doctors will help the baby, and then we'll figure everything else out. Becca squeezed her daughter's hand, marveling at the strength and wisdom contained in such a small person. Emma had already suffered too much, learned too early that adults weren't always reliable protectors. But she'd also learned that love meant showing up, offering help, staying calm in crisis. As their taxi pulled away from the luxury high-rise, Becca looked back to see John silhouetted in their penthouse window, his phone pressed to his ear and his free hand gesticulating angrily. He was already moving on to damage control, calculating his next moves in the chess game of self-preservation. The contractions continued during the ride to the hospital, each one a reminder that this crisis was far from over. The baby inside her was responding to stress hormones, possibly trying to escape the toxic environment that had become their daily reality. But for the first time in months, Becca felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. She'd stood up to John's threats and chosen her children's safety over his demands. It was a small victory, but it felt like the first step toward reclaiming her own life. The wealthy CEO husband's empire was crumbling, his true criminal nature exposed, and his pregnant wife was finally beginning to understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's destruction of your family. The breaking point had been reached, and there would be no going back to the perfect facade they'd maintained for so long. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos. Becca sat in a wheelchair, timing her contractions while Emma perched in the visitor's chair nearby, clutching the overnight bags and watching her mother with worried eyes. Dr. Claire Brooks, a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and graying hair, finished examining Becca and delivered her assessment. The contractions are real, but they're stress-induced rather than natural labor progression. Baby's heartbeat is strong, but I want to keep you for observation. How long will that take? Becca asked, relief and anxiety warring in her voice. At least 24 hours? Possibly longer if the contractions don't subside. Dr. Brooks glanced at Emma, then back to Becca. Is there someone we should call? Your husband? Family? Becca's silence spoke volumes. Emma shifted in her chair, her 9-year-old mind processing the implications of her stepfather's absence during this crisis. Actually, Dr. Brooks continued carefully, I need to ask some questions about your home situation. The stress levels that trigger this kind of early labor don't usually come from nowhere. Before Becca could respond, her phone buzzing with an incoming call from John. She let it go to voicemail, then immediately buzzed again. And again. Mama, maybe you should answer it, Emma suggested quietly. Maybe he's worried about the baby. Becca reluctantly took the call. John's voice erupted from the speaker before she could say hello. Where are you? What hospital? I've been calling for an hour. St. Mary's. Dr. Brooks says the baby is fine, but I need to stay for observation. Good. Listen carefully. I'm sending my attorney to the hospital. Don't talk to any staff members about our personal life. Don't sign any documents. John, I'm having medical treatment, not a police interrogation. Everything is a potential interrogation now. The FBI investigation hit the news an hour ago. Reporters are already calling, trying to get family angles for their stories. Dr. Brooks had been pretending not to listen, but Becca caught her exchanging glances with the attending nurse. The conversation was clearly raising red flags for the medical staff. I have to go, Becca said. The doctor needs to... Don't hang up on me, Rebecca. We need to coordinate our stories, make sure everyone understands that this pregnancy complication has nothing to do with our home environment. Our home environment is exactly what caused this. The line went quiet for a long moment. When John spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. Be very careful what you say to hospital staff. Remember that Emma's custody could become an issue if you paint me as an unfit parent. The threat was clear and terrifying. Becca ended the call with shaking hands, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with labor contractions. Dr. Brooks approached the bedside with professional concern written across her features. Mrs. Whitmore, I couldn't help overhearing parts of that conversation. Is there anything about your home situation that you'd like to discuss? Emma was listening intently, her young face showing she understood more than adults often credited children with understanding. Becca felt trapped between protecting her daughter from harsh realities and protecting them both from John's retaliation. Everything's fine, she said automatically. Just work stress. My husband's company is going through some challenges. But even as she spoke, Becca's body was betraying her words. Her blood pressure was elevated, her hands trembled, and the stress contractions continued despite medical intervention. Dr. Brooks had seen enough domestic violence cases to recognize the signs. Emma, Dr. Brooks said kindly, there's a wonderful volunteer coordinator named Mrs. Chen who runs activities for children in our family waiting area. Would you like to see what she's doing today? Emma looked to her mother for permission, clearly reluctant to leave during a crisis. "It's okay, baby," Becca assured her. "I'm just going to rest, and the doctors will take good care of the baby." After Emma left with a cheerful volunteer, Dr. Brooks closed the room door and pulled up a chair beside Becca's bed. "Off the record," she said quietly, "I've been an emergency room doctor for 15 years. I know stress-induced labor when I see it, and I know the difference between work pressure and domestic pressure." Becca's carefully constructed defenses began to crack. "I can't talk about this. You don't understand what he's capable of. What I understand is that untreated domestic stress during pregnancy can lead to serious complications for both mother and baby. What I understand is that children who witness domestic violence suffer trauma that affects them for life." "He's never hit me," Becca said quickly, then realized how defensive that sounded. Physical violence isn't the only kind of domestic abuse. Financial control, emotional manipulation, threats involving children, these are all forms of domestic violence that can be just as damaging. The words hung in the air like a diagnosis. Domestic violence. The term applied to other people, women who appeared on talk shows or in public service announcements. Not to Rebecca Whitmore, who lived in a penthouse and wore designer clothes and married a successful CEO. "I don't know what to do," Becca whispered, the admission feeling like stepping off a cliff. "He controls everything, our money, our house, Emma's school. If I leave him, I have nothing." Dr. Brooks reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small card. "This is the number for our hospital's domestic violence resource coordinator. She can explain your options, help you understand your rights, connect you with services. He said he'd fight for custody of Emma. She's not even his biological daughter, but he adopted her after we married. Legal adoption doesn't give someone the right to terrorize a child or her mother. There are protections in place for situations like this." Before Becca could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Raised voices, the sound of someone arguing with hospital security. Through the door's window, she could see John in an expensive suit, gesticulating angrily at a security guard, while a well-dressed man with a briefcase stood nearby. "That's him," Becca said, panic rising in her voice. "That's my husband." Dr. Brooks moved quickly to the door, engaging the privacy lock. "Hospital security will handle this. Patients have the right to restrict visitors, especially when there are safety concerns." John's voice carried through the door as he argued with the guard. "I'm her husband, and that's my unborn child she's carrying. I have every legal right to be in that room. Sir, visiting hours are restricted, and the patient has requested privacy during her medical treatment." "This is ridiculous. I'm calling my attorney." The man with the briefcase stepped forward, presumably the attorney John had mentioned. "I'm Thomas Chen, representing Mr. Whitmore. We'd like to speak with the attending physician about our client's wife and unborn child." Dr. Brooks cracked the door open just enough to address the attorney. "I'm Dr. Brooks. Patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing any medical details without written consent from the patient herself." "We'll get a court order if necessary," the attorney replied smoothly. "You're welcome to try," Dr. Brooks responded with professional calm. "In the meantime, hospital security will ensure that our patient can focus on her medical care without additional stress." John's voice rose dangerously. "Rebecca, I know you can hear me. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Think about Emma's future. Think about the baby's future." Even through the door, his words felt like physical blows. Becca pressed her hands to her belly, feeling the baby move restlessly inside her, already responding to the tension and fear that had become their constant companion. "I want to see Emma," she said to Dr. Brooks. "I need to know she's safe." "Of course, I'll have her brought back, and we'll arrange for both of you to stay in a secure area of the hospital until the contractions subside." As Dr. Brooks made arrangements, Becca stared at the domestic violence resource card in her trembling hands. The printed number seemed to represent a door she'd never imagined walking through, a path that led away from the luxury and security she'd known towards something uncertain but potentially safer. Outside in the hallway, John's voice continued its steady assault on hospital staff and security. His need to control the situation, to manage the narrative even in a medical emergency, revealed everything Dr. Brooks needed to know about the dynamics of the Whitmore marriage. When Emma returned, escorted by the volunteer coordinator, Her young face was tight with worry. "Mama, why is Daddy John yelling at the nurses? They're just trying to help us." The innocent question pierced Becca's heart. Emma had already learned to expect chaos and conflict wherever John appeared, had already internalized that his presence meant walking on eggshells and managing adult emotions. "He's worried about the baby," Becca said, hating herself for making excuses, but not knowing how else to explain the unexplainable to a 9-year-old. "But yelling at nice people doesn't help babies," Emma said with the clear logic of childhood. "It just scares everybody." Dr. Brooks caught Becca's eye over Emma's head, her expression saying everything that professional boundaries prevented her from speaking aloud. "Children know. Children always know when something is wrong, even when adults work desperately to hide it. The stress-induced contractions that had brought them to the hospital were just the beginning. The real labor Becca faced was the hard work of examining her life, acknowledging the truth about her marriage, and finding the courage to choose a different path for herself and her children." Outside the locked door, the millionaire CEO husband continued his attempts to control and manipulate, even as his empire crumbled and his true nature was exposed to anyone willing to see it clearly. Inside the room, his pregnant wife held his adopted daughter close and began to imagine what life might look like beyond the suffocating walls of narcissistic abuse. The story broke on the 6 o'clock news while Becca lay in her hospital bed, Emma curled up beside her, watching cartoons on the room's television. The sudden shift from animated characters to the stern face of a news anchor made them both look up. Tonight, an exclusive investigation into Whitmore Systems, the technology company founded by CEO Jonathan Whitmore. Federal agents have frozen company accounts amid allegations of embezzlement and securities fraud. Meanwhile, sources tell us that Whitmore's pregnant wife was rushed to the hospital earlier today under mysterious circumstances. Becca's blood ran cold as her worst fears materialized on the screen. A photo of John appeared alongside footage of FBI agents carrying boxes from his office building, followed by an older image from a charity event showing the three of them together as a seemingly perfect family. Emma pointed at the screen with excitement. "Look, Mama, there's us! There's that pretty dress you wore to the hospital fundraiser last year." But Becca was reading the news ticker scrolling across the bottom of the screen. CEO's wife hospitalized during federal investigation. Questions raised about family stability. Neighbors report history of domestic disturbances. "Turn it off," she whispered, but it was too late. The damage was already unfolding in real time. The reporter continued. "We've learned that Rebecca Whitmore, who is 7 months pregnant, was hospitalized at St. Mary's today for what sources describe as stress-induced labor complications. Hospital staff have confirmed that security measures have been implemented due to what they call domestic concerns." Emma's face scrunched in confusion. What does domestic concerns mean? Before Becca could answer, her phone exploded with incoming calls. Text messages flooded in from numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters, bloggers, neighbors, and acquaintances suddenly interested in the Whitmore family drama. Dr. Brooks entered the room, her face grim. "I'm afraid we have a situation. There are reporters gathering outside the hospital, and someone leaked details about your admission despite our privacy protocols." "How is that possible?" Becca asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Hospital records are legally protected, but public information requests can sometimes reveal basic details. Also, your husband's attorney has been making calls to various media outlets, apparently trying to control the narrative. The news program shifted to an interview with a former Whitmore Systems employee, a nervous-looking woman in her 30s who spoke carefully about the company culture. "There were always rumors about Mr. Whitmore's temper," she said. "He was very controlling, very demanding. People walked on eggshells around him. The pressure he put on everyone was intense." Emma was listening with the focused attention children give to adult conversations they don't fully understand, but sense are important. "Mama, why are people saying mean things about Daddy John on TV?" "Sometimes when adults have problems, other people like to talk about those problems instead of their own," Becca said carefully. "It's not very nice, but it happens." But even as she tried to shield Emma from the harsh realities, Becca felt a strange sense of validation watching the news coverage. For 2 years, she'd been gaslighted into believing that John's behavior was normal, that her reactions were oversensitive, that his controlling nature was just part of being married to a successful businessman. Now seeing former employees and business associates confirming what she'd experienced privately, she realized she hadn't been crazy or ungrateful or impossible to please. She'd been living with a man whose need for control extended to every aspect of his personal and professional life. Her phone rang. Patricia Henderson, their next-door neighbor. Against her better judgment, Becca answered. "Rebecca, honey, I've been watching the news. Are you and Emma okay?" Patricia was a retired nurse in her late 40s, someone who'd always been kind but kept appropriate neighborly distance. Now her voice carried genuine concern and something that sounded like recognition. "We're fine, Pat. Just some pregnancy complications brought on by stress. Honey, I need to tell you something. I've heard things coming from your apartment. Arguments, shouting, sounds of things breaking. I've been worried for months but didn't know how to approach it." Becca closed her eyes, humiliation washing over her. Their fights hadn't been as private as she'd thought. The neighbors knew. Emma's school friends might know. The perfect facade had been transparent to anyone paying attention. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," she whispered. "Don't apologize to me, sweetie. Apologize to yourself for putting up with it for so long. I've been a nurse for 30 years. I know the signs of domestic stress, and I know how it affects pregnancies." Emma looked up from the cartoon she'd returned to watching, sensing the emotional weight of the conversation, even if she couldn't understand the words. "Pat, I can't really talk right now. I understand. But Rebecca, I want you to know that you have people who care about you, people who've seen what's been happening and want to help. You're not alone in this." After ending the call, Becca stared out the hospital room window at the darkening city skyline. Somewhere out there, John was likely in crisis mode, calling attorneys and public relations specialists, crafting statements and strategies to minimize the damage to his reputation. But here in this sterile hospital room, with Emma safe beside her and medical professionals monitoring the baby's well-being, Becca felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace. No walking on eggshells, no analyzing John's moods, no preparing Emma for potential explosions of adult anger. Dr. Brooks returned with a gentle knock. "I have some updates. First, your contractions have completely stopped. Your blood pressure is normalizing. It's remarkable how quickly your body's responding to the reduced stress environment." "Does that mean we can go home?" Emma asked hopefully, then immediately looked worried. "I mean, if home is safe." The innocent question broke Becca's heart and clarified her priorities simultaneously. Emma shouldn't have to wonder if home was safe. No child should live with that kind of uncertainty. "That's the second thing I wanted to discuss," Dr. Brooks continued. "Our social services coordinator has been in touch with some resources that might be helpful. There are safe housing options available for families in situations like yours." "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of drastic change," Becca said automatically. "With respect," Dr. Brooks replied gently, "your body has been telling us for months that you're ready. Stress-induced labor complications, elevated blood pressure, anxiety symptoms. These are your body's way of saying the current situation is unsustainable." Emma had muted the television but was clearly listening to every word. At 9 years old, she was being forced to participate in adult decisions that should never involve children. What would happen to Emma's school? Becca asked. Her friends? Her routine? There are excellent public schools with strong support programs for children transitioning from difficult situations. Emma is resilient. Children usually are. But she needs stability and safety more than she needs to maintain appearances. The phrase maintaining appearances hit Becca like a physical blow. How much of their life decisions had been based on keeping up the perfect facade rather than prioritizing actual well-being? Her phone buzzed with a text message from John. "Come home immediately. We need to present a united front. Reporters are calling this a domestic violence situation, which is ridiculous and defamatory. Your cooperation is essential." Even in crisis, he was issuing commands rather than expressing concern for her health or the baby's well-being. The message contained no questions about how she was feeling, no acknowledgement that she'd been hospitalized with pregnancy complications. "Dr. Brooks," Becca said slowly, "what exactly do these safe housing programs involve?" "Temporary accommodation while you establish independence. Legal advocacy to help you understand your rights regarding custody, finances, and divorce proceedings. Counseling services for both you and Emma to help process the trauma and develop healthy coping strategies. Emma looked up from her coloring book. The hospital had provided art supplies to keep her occupied. "Mama, what's trauma?" Dr. Brooks knelt to Emma's eye level with practiced gentleness. "Trauma is when scary or sad things happen that make us feel worried or confused. But there are people whose job it is to help families feel safe and happy again. Like doctors help sick people get better?" Exactly like that. Sometimes families need special doctors called counselors who help with feelings instead of with bodies. Becca watched this exchange with growing clarity. Emma was already showing signs of emotional distress, hypervigilance around adult moods, inappropriate responsibility for managing family dynamics, anxiety about expressing normal childhood needs. Her phone rang again. John's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in 2 years, Becca made a conscious decision not to answer immediately. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message with Emma sitting beside her. "Rebecca, I know you're playing games to try to make me look bad, but this has gone far enough. Every minute you stay in that hospital gives ammunition to people who want to destroy our family. Come home now, or there will be serious consequences for everyone involved." Even Emma could hear the menace in John's voice through the phone speaker. The 9-year-old's face went pale, and she instinctively moved closer to her mother. "He sounds really angry," she whispered. "Yes, he does," Becca agreed, no longer trying to make excuses or explanations for John's behavior. Dr. Brooks had heard the message too. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm required to ask, do you feel safe returning to your home environment with Emma and in your current pregnancy condition?" The question hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. For months, Becca had been so focused on staying afloat, on managing John's moods and maintaining their lifestyle, that she lost sight of the possibility of swimming to shore. "No," she said quietly. "No, I don't feel safe." Emma reached for her mother's hand. "That's okay, Mama. We can be brave together." The wisdom and resilience of her 9-year-old daughter put Becca's own fears into perspective. Emma had already survived her father's death, adapted to a new stepfather, endured months of walking on eggshells around adult anger. She deserved better than a childhood spent managing other people's emotions and accepting conditional love. "Dr. Brooks," Becca said with growing strength in her voice, "I'd like to speak with your social services coordinator about those safe housing options." As the doctor left to make arrangements, Becca held Emma close and watched the news coverage of John's crumbling empire play silently on the television screen. The millionaire CEO husband who had controlled every aspect of their lives was being exposed as a criminal and an abuser, his carefully constructed image dissolving under public scrutiny. But in this hospital room, his pregnant wife was finally finding the courage to choose safety over status, reality over facade, and her children's well-being over her abuser's demands. The public exposure that John had feared was becoming the catalyst for Becca's freedom. Detective Sarah Martinez had seen enough domestic violence cases to recognize the patterns, but the Whitmore situation was complicated by wealth, media attention, and Jonathan Whitmore's connections throughout the city's power structure. She sat across from Becca in a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria, Emma coloring quietly at a nearby table while they talked. "The district attorney's office wants to move quickly on this," Detective Martinez explained. "The FBI investigation into his business practices has created a window of opportunity where his influence is diminished." "What does that mean exactly?" Becca asked, absently stirring sugar into her coffee with trembling hands. "It means that normally, men with Jonathan Whitmore's resources can tie up domestic violence cases in court for months or years. High-powered attorneys, character witnesses, public relations campaigns designed to discredit victims. But right now, his credibility is compromised." Through the cafeteria windows, they could see news vans still parked outside the hospital's main entrance. The story had taken on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of privilege and abuse hidden behind wealthy facades. "I keep thinking I should feel relieved," Becca said quietly, "but mostly I feel terrified. You don't understand how angry he gets when he can't control situations." Detective Martinez leaned forward, her expression serious. "Tell me about his anger. Has he ever been physically violent?" "Not exactly. He's grabbed my arms hard enough to leave bruises, shoved me during arguments, thrown things near me but not directly at me." Becca paused, realizing how she was minimizing behaviors that would terrify her if she witnessed them happening to someone else. What about threats? Constantly. Threats to take Emma away, to destroy my reputation, to leave me with nothing. He says I'd be homeless within a month if he withdrew his support. Emma looked up from her coloring, having heard her name mentioned. The child's hypervigilance was another form of evidence, Detective Martinez noted. Children who lived with domestic violence learned to monitor adult conversations for signs of danger. Emma, sweetheart, the detective said gently, do you ever feel scared at home? Emma glanced at her mother nervously. Sometimes Daddy John gets really loud when he's mad about work stuff. Does he ever get mad at you or your mama? He doesn't like it when I make noise during his phone calls. And he gets really upset if Mama does things wrong, like spill something or forget to do things exactly how he likes them. Becca felt sick listening to her daughter describe their home life with such matter-of-fact acceptance of impossible standards and explosive anger. Emma, has Daddy John ever hurt you or your mama? The 9-year-old considered this carefully. He hurt Mama's arm one time when she tried to stop him from breaking her music box, and he made me hit my head on the coffee table when he pushed past me to get to his office. When did that happen? Last week. Mama said it was an accident, but Emma trailed off, her child's instincts telling her there was more to say, but uncertain whether she should say it. Detective Martinez made careful notes while keeping her expression neutral and unthreatening. What else do you remember about that day, Emma? Daddy John was yelling about losing money, and Mama was crying, and when I tried to help, he pushed really hard to get me out of the way. I fell and hit the sharp corner of the table, and there was blood. Becca remembered the incident differently, or rather she'd forced herself to accept John's version of events. He'd claimed it was an accident that Emma had gotten underfoot during an adult conversation. But hearing her daughter's clear recollection, she realized how thoroughly she'd been gaslighting herself. Did you see a doctor about your head injury, Emma? Mama wanted to take me, but Daddy John said it was just a little cut, and doctors would ask too many questions about stuff that wasn't their business. Detective Martinez exchanged glances with Becca. Medical records could have provided documentation of the incident, but John's insistence on avoiding professional care was another red flag indicating his awareness that his behavior was problematic. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask about your finances. Do you have access to bank accounts, credit cards, or assets in your own name? Everything is in John's name. He said it was more efficient for tax purposes, and since I wasn't working after Emma was born, he managed all our finances. What about before your marriage? Did you have savings, property, or retirement accounts? I had some savings when we got married, but John convinced me to consolidate everything into joint accounts that he managed. He said his investment advisor could get better returns than my simple savings accounts. Financial abuse was often the chain that kept domestic violence victims trapped, Detective Martinez knew. Without independent resources, leaving became exponentially more difficult, especially with children involved. There's something else you should know, the detective continued. We've been investigating your husband's business practices for months, and some of what we've discovered has implications for your personal safety. Becca felt her blood pressure rising. What kind of implications? Jonathan Whitmore has been moving large sums of money to offshore accounts over the past 6 months. Bank records suggest he's been preparing for the possibility of fleeing the country if the FBI investigation became too threatening. Fleeing the country, Becca repeated slowly, with Emma and the baby? That's what we're concerned about. His communications with his attorney include discussions about international custody laws and countries without extradition treaties with the United States. Emma had stopped coloring and was listening with the intense focus children develop when they sense adult conversations involve their safety. He can't just take us out of the country without permission, can he? Becca asked. Legally, no, but men facing federal criminal charges sometimes make desperate decisions. That's why we need to move quickly to establish protective orders and document the domestic violence history. As if summoned by their conversation, Becca's phone buzzed with another message from John. Stop playing games with my family. Every minute you spend talking to police and reporters makes this situation worse for everyone. Come home now and we'll work this out privately. Detective Martinez read the message over Becca's shoulder. Mrs. Whitmore, I want you to understand something clearly. This investigation is no longer optional or private. We have enough evidence of financial crimes to arrest your husband with or without your cooperation. But your testimony about the domestic violence could make the difference between a few years in prison and decades. What if he tries to hurt us before you can arrest him? We can arrange protective custody, safe housing, and enhanced security measures. But you and Emma need to stay away from any locations he knows about. Your home, Emma's school, places you regularly visit. Emma finally spoke up, her voice small but clear. Detective Martinez, if Daddy John goes to jail, what happens to me and Mama and the baby? The question broke Becca's heart and clarified her priorities simultaneously. Emma's concern wasn't about losing their luxurious lifestyle or changing schools. She was worried about basic safety and family stability. You and your mama and the new baby will be safe, Detective Martinez assured her. There are people whose job it is to help families start over when they need to leave dangerous situations. Will we still be a family? You'll still be a family. Maybe an even better family because you won't have to worry about walking on eggshells or managing someone else's anger all the time. Becca watched Emma process this information with the resilience that had carried her through so many adult crises. At 9 years old, she was already showing more emotional maturity than many adults, more wisdom about relationships and safety than her own mother had demonstrated. Detective Martinez, Becca said with growing strength in her voice, what do I need to do to keep my children safe? First, we need formal statements from both you and Emma about the domestic violence incidents. Second, we need to get protective orders in place. Third, we need to move you to a secure location before your husband realizes how serious this investigation has become. As they prepared to leave the cafeteria, Becca's phone rang with yet another call from John. This time, Detective Martinez gestured for her to answer it while recording the conversation. Rebecca, I know the police are filling your head with lies about me, but you need to remember who you're dealing with. I built our life from nothing. I can destroy it just as easily. John, I'm trying to protect our children. You're trying to destroy our marriage because you're too weak to handle the pressure of being married to a successful man. But I won't let you use my unborn daughter as a weapon against me. This isn't about weapons or marriage. This is about Emma getting hurt when you lose your temper, about stress-induced labor complications, about creating a safe environment for our family. John's laugh was sharp and bitter. Safe environment? You want safe? Then stop talking to cops and reporters and come home where I can protect you from the consequences of this media circus you've created. Detective Martinez made notes about the conversation's tone and content, while Emma listened with growing understanding that this wasn't a normal adult disagreement, but something more serious and potentially dangerous. I'm not coming home, John, not until things change significantly. Things won't change, Rebecca. You belong to me and so do both of those children. Geography won't change that basic fact. Distance won't change that basic fact. Police investigations won't change that basic fact. The possessive language chilled everyone listening to the call. Detective Martinez had heard similar statements from other domestic abusers, but rarely delivered with such cold certainty. After ending the call, Becca sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Emma reached across the table and patted her mother's hand with the gentle wisdom of a child who had learned too early how to comfort adults. Mama, he sounded like he was trying to scare you. Yes, baby, he was. But we don't have to be scared of people who try to scare us, right? We can just stay away from them and let the police handle it? Detective Martinez smiled at Emma's clear thinking. That's exactly right, Emma. Sometimes adults act like bullies, and the best thing to do is get help from other adults whose job it is to stop bullies. As they left the hospital cafeteria, Becca realized that the hunt wasn't just law enforcement pursuing John. It was also John hunting for ways to maintain control over his family, even as his world collapsed around him. The difference was that now she had allies, resources, and most importantly, clarity about what was really at stake. The millionaire CEO husband's desperation was making him increasingly dangerous, but his pregnant wife was finally understanding that running from a predator required help, strategy, and the courage to trust people whose job it was to protect families rather than control them. 3 days later, against the advice of Detective Martinez and Dr. Brooks, Becca found herself in the parking lot of Riverside Mall, the same location where she'd met John for lunch dates during their courtship. The irony wasn't lost on her. This place that had once symbolized new beginnings was now the stage for what she hoped would be their final confrontation. She wore a wire provided by the police department, the small recording device hidden beneath her maternity sweater, feeling like a talisman of protection and truth. Emma was safe at the domestic violence shelter, working on homework with a volunteer tutor who specialized in helping children transition through family crises. John arrived precisely on time, emerging from his black Mercedes wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite disguise the strain of the past week. His usually perfect hair showed signs of stress, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights spent managing legal strategies and media damage control. "You look tired," he said as he approached, his voice carrying the false concern she'd learned to recognize as manipulation. "This whole situation has been hard on both of us." "It's been hardest on Emma," Becca replied, keeping her distance despite his attempt to embrace her. "She's been having nightmares about the night you pushed her into the coffee table." John's expression flickered between surprise and anger. "I never pushed Emma. She got in the way during an adult conversation, and there was an accident. You know that." "I know that's what you told me to believe, but Emma remembers it differently, and so do I when I really think about what happened." They stood in the shadow of the mall's main entrance, early evening shoppers flowing around them with the casual normalcy of people whose lives weren't imploding in real time. The ordinariness of the setting made their conversation feel surreal. "Rebecca, I understand that you're upset about the business situation, about the media attention, about the stress this has put on your pregnancy, but running away to a shelter, cooperating with police investigations, talking to reporters, none of this helps our family." "Our family has needed help for months, John. The difference is that now I'm getting it from people whose job is to provide help, instead of trying to manage everything alone." John's carefully controlled facade began to crack. "Those people don't care about you or Emma or our unborn daughter. They care about advancing their careers by taking down successful men. You're being used, and you're too naive to see it. Dr. Brooks cares about preventing pregnancy complications caused by domestic stress. Detective Martinez cares about protecting women and children from escalating violence. The shelter coordinator cares about helping families rebuild their lives safely." "And what about me?" John's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby shoppers. "What about 2 years of marriage? What about the home I provided, the lifestyle I've given you and Emma, the financial security I've created for our family? What about the fear, John? What about Emma hiding in her room when you lose your temper? What about me walking on eggshells for months, afraid that any mistake might trigger your anger? What about stress-induced labor complications because my body was literally trying to escape the toxic environment you created?" The words tumbled out with months of suppressed honesty behind them. Becca felt the strange freedom of no longer protecting his feelings, no longer minimizing his behavior, no longer accepting responsibility for managing his emotional reactions. John's mask slipped completely. "You ungrateful, selfish—" He caught himself, glancing around at the people within earshot. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed to build our life. The pressure, the responsibility, the weight of supporting everyone who depends on me. I never asked you to sacrifice anything, John. I asked you to treat me and Emma with basic respect and kindness. But apparently that was too much to ask." "Respect?" John's laugh was bitter and sharp. "You want to talk about respect? Then let's talk about how you've humiliated me in front of the entire city, how you've cooperated with a federal investigation designed to destroy everything I've built. The federal investigation exists because you committed crimes. That has nothing to do with me. Everything has to do with you." John's voice reached a dangerous pitch, and several nearby shoppers stopped to stare. "I moved money around to maintain the lifestyle you expected, to keep Emma in private school, to ensure our family projected success and stability. You embezzled funds and lied about it for months. You put our family at risk with your illegal activities, then blamed me when the consequences caught up with you." John stepped closer, his bulk looming over her in a way that felt deliberately intimidating. "You think you can just walk away, take my children and disappear into some social services program, like a welfare case? They're my children too, John. Emma is my biological daughter, and this baby is mine regardless of what happens between us. Emma is legally my daughter now. I adopted her, I've supported her, I've given her opportunities she never would have had without me. And this baby, he gestured toward her belly with a possessive intensity that made Becca step backward. This baby is half mine, carries my DNA, represents my legacy. The crowd of onlookers was growing larger, drawn by the escalating tension and raised voices. Becca recognized some faces from the charity gala circuit, people who had once smiled and made polite conversation about weather and fundraising goals. "John, you're making a scene. People are watching." "Let them watch," he snarled. "Let them see what happens when a wife betrays her husband's trust, when she destroys a family because she's too weak to handle temporary stress." "Temporary stress?" Becca's voice carried clearly across the parking lot. "You've been emotionally abusing me for months, terrorizing a 9-year-old child, creating a home environment so toxic that it triggered premature labor. That's not temporary stress. That's domestic violence." The words domestic violence seemed to electrify the growing crowd. Several people pulled out phones, apparently recognizing the Whitmore name from recent news coverage. The scene was becoming exactly what John had always feared, a public exposure of his private behavior. "You're making a mistake, Rebecca," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "A very serious mistake that will have consequences for everyone involved." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. You belong to me, and so do both children. If I can't have my family intact, then no one gets to have anything." The statement sent chills through everyone within earshot. Several bystanders were now openly recording the confrontation, and Becca could see a security guard approaching from the mall entrance. "What exactly does that mean, John?" "It means I'd rather see you dead than watch you raise my children to believe their father is some kind of monster. It means I'd rather take them with me than leave them to be poisoned against me by social workers and therapists and all the other people who think they know what's best for our family." The threat was clear and terrifying, captured perfectly by the wire Becca wore and witnessed by dozens of onlookers. John had finally revealed the depth of his obsession and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain control. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back," the security guard said, approaching cautiously. "We've had reports of a disturbance." "There's no disturbance," John replied smoothly, instantly shifting to his public persona. "Just a private conversation between husband and wife about family matters." But the crowd had heard too much, seen too much. The mask had slipped too completely to be reconstructed. Several people called out supportive comments to Becca. "You don't have to take that. Call the police. That's not how husbands should talk to wives." The community's support felt like a revelation. For months, Becca had felt isolated and alone in her struggle to understand John's behavior. Now she was surrounded by ordinary people who recognized abuse when they witnessed it and were willing to speak up. "Ma'am, are you safe?" the security guard asked Becca directly. "Do you need assistance?" Before she could answer, John's phone buzzed insistently. He checked the message, and his face went pale, then flushed with renewed fury. "Perfect," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The FBI just executed a search warrant on our house. They're seizing everything: computers, financial records, personal documents. Are you happy now, Rebecca? Is this the outcome you wanted?" "I wanted our family to be safe and healthy. I wanted Emma to grow up without fear. I wanted our baby to be born into a loving environment instead of a war zone." "Well, congratulations. Now our children get to grow up knowing their father is in federal prison, living in poverty while you work minimum wage jobs to support them. I hope it was worth it." The crowd was pressing closer now, drawn by the drama but also seeming to form a protective circle around Becca. Their presence felt like community justice in action, ordinary people refusing to ignore domestic violence when they witnessed it firsthand. "Sir, you need to leave now," the security guard said firmly. "The police are on their way, and this situation needs to de-escalate immediately." John looked around at the faces surrounding them, many now holding phones recording his every word. The public exposure he'd feared was complete, his carefully constructed image destroyed beyond repair. "This isn't over, Rebecca," he said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Marriage is forever. Family is forever. Geography doesn't change that. Legal proceedings don't change that. You can run, but you can't hide from the basic facts of biology and law." As police sirens approached in the distance, John stalked back to his Mercedes, leaving Becca surrounded by supportive strangers who had witnessed his threats and controlling behavior firsthand. The millionaire CEO husband's desperation had been exposed publicly, his true nature revealed to dozens of witnesses. But even as relief flooded through her, Becca knew this confrontation was just the beginning. John's threats about taking the children with him suggested a level of desperation that could become extremely dangerous as his legal situation deteriorated. The hunt was far from over. It was just shifting into its most perilous phase. Judge Margaret Thompson had presided over family court for 15 years, but the Whitmore case presented complexities she'd rarely encountered. The intersection of federal criminal charges, domestic violence allegations, and child custody issues created legal challenges that required careful navigation. "Your Honor," began Thomas Chen, John's attorney, "my client is a respected businessman facing baseless allegations that stem from his estranged wife's vindictive attempts to gain advantage in divorce proceedings." Becca sat in the gallery with Emma beside her, both of them flanked by advocates from the Domestic Violence Resource Center. The courthouse atmosphere felt formal and intimidating, but Detective Martinez had prepared them for what to expect. "These aren't divorce proceedings, counselor," Judge Thompson replied crisply. "This is a hearing to determine whether protective orders are warranted based on documented threats and evidence of escalating domestic violence." Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos rose to present the prosecution's case. "Your Honor, we have recorded threats made by Mr. Whitmore in a public setting, witnessed by dozens of citizens. Quote, 'I'd rather see you dead than watch you raise my children to believe their father is some kind of monster.' This was stated after Mrs. Whitmore expressed concerns about the emotional impact of his behavior on her 9-year-old daughter. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat, understanding more of the legal proceedings than any child should have to comprehend. The court-appointed child advocate, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, had spent hours preparing her for today's testimony, explaining how the legal system worked to protect children in dangerous situations. Furthermore, Ada Santos continued, Mr. Whitmore has access to substantial financial resources that he has been moving to offshore accounts, suggesting flight risk and the possibility of international parental kidnapping. John sat rigid at the defendant's table, his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair creating the image of a successful executive wrongly accused. But the recordings from the parking lot confrontation had damaged his credibility significantly. "Mr. Chen, how does your client respond to these specific allegations?" "Your Honor, my client's words were taken out of context during an emotionally charged conversation about the dissolution of his marriage. He's facing tremendous pressure from federal investigators who are trying to destroy his business, and his comments reflected frustration rather than genuine threats." Judge Thompson reviewed the case files spread across her bench. "Mr. Chen, I've listened to the recordings from the mall parking lot. Your client's statements were quite specific and included references to taking the children with him rather than allowing them to be poisoned against him. How do you interpret that language?" "Hyperbole, Your Honor. The natural reaction of a father facing the prospect of losing access to his children due to false accusations. And the documented history of domestic incidents, the stress-induced labor complications, the child's testimony about being injured during an altercation?" Thomas Chen shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Whitmore has been under enormous stress due to the media attention surrounding the federal investigation. Her medical complications are related to that publicity, not to any actions by my client." Ada Santos stood again. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Emma Sullivan to testify via closed-circuit television, as arranged by the court's child protection protocols." Emma squeezed her mother's hand as Dr. Walsh led her to a smaller room adjacent to the courtroom. The 9-year-old had practiced this testimony multiple times, learning to speak clearly and honestly about her experiences without being traumatized by direct confrontation with John. On the courtroom's television screen, Emma appeared small and serious, sitting beside Dr. Walsh in a room decorated with children's artwork and comfortable furniture. "Emma," Dr. Walsh began gently, "can you tell us what it's like at home when Daddy John gets angry? He gets really loud and says mean things to Mama. Sometimes he throws things or slams doors really hard. Mama tries to make him feel better, but nothing works when he's that mad. And has Daddy John ever been angry at you specifically?" Emma nodded solemnly. He doesn't like it when I make noise during his work calls, and he gets upset if I ask questions or try to help Mama when she's sad. Can you tell us about the time you got hurt and had to get stitches? Daddy John was yelling about money problems, and Mama was trying to calm him down. I wanted to help, so I brought Mama some tissues for her tears. But Daddy John pushed really hard to get past me to his office, and I fell and hit my head on the sharp corner of the coffee table. Judge Thompson leaned forward. Emma, did anyone tell you it was your fault that you got hurt? Daddy John said I should have stayed out of the way during adult conversations, but Mama said it wasn't my fault, that adults should be careful around children, even when they're upset. The child's clear, honest testimony was devastating to John's claims of accidental contact. Emma's description matched the medical records from her emergency room visit, which had been obtained despite John's attempts to prevent professional documentation. Thank you, Emma, Dr. Walsh concluded. You've been very brave and helpful. As Emma returned to the courtroom, John's attorney requested a brief recess to consult with his client. Judge Thompson granted 15 minutes, during which heated whispers could be heard from the defendant's table. When proceedings resumed, Thomas Chen's approach had shifted noticeably. Your Honor, my client would like to propose a voluntary separation agreement that ensures his children's safety while allowing supervised visitation rights. Judge Thompson raised her eyebrows. Mr. Chen, this hearing is about protective orders, not custody arrangements. Is your client acknowledging that protective measures are necessary? My client acknowledges that emotions have been running high during this difficult period and that some cooling off time might benefit everyone involved. Ada Santos objected immediately. Your Honor, Mr. Whitmore's recorded threats specifically mentioned harming his wife and taking the children with him rather than losing custody. Supervised visitation doesn't address the risk of kidnapping or violence. Furthermore, Detective Martinez added from the witness stand, our investigation has revealed that Mr. Whitmore has been researching countries without extradition treaties and has moved substantial assets offshore. This suggests premeditation for flight with the children? Judge Thompson studied John carefully. Mr. Whitmore, you have the right to address the court directly. Do you wish to respond to these allegations? John stood slowly, his composure cracking under the weight of evidence and testimony. Your Honor, I've spent 2 years building a family with Rebecca and Emma. Everything I've done, every business decision, every financial arrangement, has been motivated by providing for their security and future. That doesn't address the specific allegations of threats and domestic violence. I admit that I've been under tremendous pressure, that I've sometimes lost my temper in ways that frighten my family, but I would never actually harm Rebecca or the children. They're everything to me. Mr. Whitmore, according to recorded evidence, you stated that you'd rather see your wife dead than lose control of your children. How do you explain that statement? John's carefully maintained facade finally crumbled entirely. Because I built this family. I rescued Rebecca from poverty, gave Emma opportunities she never would have had, created a life of luxury and privilege for all of us, and now they want to throw that away based on advice from social workers and police officers who don't understand what we have together. What you built, Mr. Whitmore, was a relationship based on fear and control. The evidence clearly shows a pattern of emotional abuse, financial control, and escalating threats. Judge Thompson reviewed her notes before continuing. I'm granting the protective order for Mrs. Whitmore and Emma Sullivan. Mr. Whitmore is prohibited from contacting either of them, directly or indirectly, from approaching their residence or places of employment and education, and from attempting to remove either child from the state. Additionally, given the evidence of flight risk and threats involving the children, I'm ordering the surrender of Mr. Whitmore's passport and requiring him to wear an electronic monitoring device until resolution of the federal criminal charges. John's face went white with rage. You can't do this. Those are my children, my family. I have rights. Your rights end where other people's safety begins, Judge Thompson replied firmly. This court's primary concern is the welfare of the children involved, and the evidence clearly indicates they are at risk in your presence. As court officers approached to implement the electronic monitoring order, John's eyes found Becca's across the courtroom. The look he gave her was filled with such hatred and promise of retribution that she instinctively pulled Emma closer. This isn't over, Rebecca, he said, his voice carrying despite the officer's attempts to escort him from the courtroom. Family is forever. Marriage is forever. You can't escape biology and law. Even as he was led away, his words seemed to echo in the formal courtroom, a promise of continued pursuit despite legal barriers and protective orders. Ada Santos approached Becca after the hearing concluded. The protective order is just the first step. We need to prepare for his trial on the domestic violence charges, and the federal authorities are building their case on the financial crimes. What about Emma and the baby? Becca asked, her hand moving protectively to her belly. How do we keep them safe if he's this determined to maintain control? The electronic monitoring will track his movements, and the no-contact order gives us immediate grounds for arrest if he violates it. But you'll need to remain vigilant and report any attempts at indirect contact through third parties. Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mama, does this mean we don't have to be scared of Daddy John anymore? The question broke Becca's heart, both for what it revealed about Emma's recent experiences and for the complexity of the honest answer. The legal system had provided important protections, but John's obsession with control suggested the danger was far from over. It means a lot of people are working very hard to keep us safe, baby. Judges and police officers and social workers. Lots of adults whose job it is to protect families. As they left the courthouse, Becca felt both relief and apprehension. The millionaire CEO husband's public facade had been stripped away entirely, his threats and controlling behavior documented in legal proceedings that would follow him for years. But his final words in the courtroom suggested that legal barriers might not be enough to stop someone whose identity was so completely invested in possessing and controlling his family. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, as John faced the reality of losing everything he'd built and everyone he claimed to love. The safe house looked nothing like the penthouse Becca and Emma had shared with John, but it felt more like home than anywhere they lived in 2 years. Located in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the 2-bedroom apartment was furnished simply but comfortably, with child-friendly touches that helped Emma adjust to their new, temporary reality. Look, Mama, Emma said, pointing to the small garden visible through the kitchen window. There are tomatoes growing out there. The lady next door said we can help pick them when they're ready. Patricia Henderson, their former neighbor who had become an unlikely ally, sat at the kitchen table sorting through donated clothes and supplies. The retired nurse had organized a support network among the women from their former social circle, creating a grassroots response to domestic violence that surprised everyone involved. I brought some of Emma's favorite books from your apartment, Pat said, placing a familiar stack on the counter. The building manager let me collect personal items while John was in court yesterday. The past week had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, medical appointments, and psychological evaluations. Emma was seeing Dr. Jennifer Walsh twice weekly for play therapy, learning to process the trauma of living with domestic violence while developing healthy coping mechanisms. How are the sessions going with Dr. Walsh? Pat asked as Emma settled into the living room with her coloring books. She's amazing, Becca replied, rubbing her belly where the baby was moving actively. Emma actually looks forward to their meetings. Yesterday she told me that Dr. Walsh explained how some adults have trouble managing their feelings, but that doesn't make it children's responsibility to fix adult problems. Smart woman. And how are you handling everything? Becca considered the question carefully. The answer was complicated, relief mixed with fear, gratitude tempered by uncertainty about the future, strength growing alongside persistent vulnerability. I'm starting to understand how trapped I'd become, she said slowly. Not just financially, but emotionally. I'd started believing that managing John's moods was my job, that keeping peace was more important than protecting Emma or myself. The domestic violence counselor had helped Becca recognize the subtle ways narcissistic abuse had eroded her sense of reality. The constant criticism disguised as concern, the isolation from friends and family, the gradual erosion of her confidence and decision-making abilities. The hardest part is realizing how much Emma absorbed, Becca continued. She learned to monitor adult emotions, to make herself small and quiet when tensions rose, to feel responsible for other people's anger. Through the living room doorway, they could see Emma working intently on a drawing, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. The 9-year-old's artwork had become an important part of her therapy, providing a safe way to express feelings she didn't yet have words for. What's she drawing today? Pat asked. Houses mostly. She draws the penthouse with dark colors and sharp edges, then draws other houses with bright colors and flowers. Dr. Walsh says it's her way of processing the difference between the life we had and the life we're building. Becca's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. John's electronic monitoring shows he's been driving past Emma's school and the hospital where you delivered her. No direct contact, but he's clearly testing boundaries. The message sent familiar anxiety coursing through Becca's system, but she recognized the feeling now as a trauma response rather than evidence of immediate danger. John was being monitored. The school had security protocols in place, and she had a support network ready to respond to any escalation. Bad news, Pat asked, noticing Becca's expression. John's testing the limits of his restraining order, not violating it technically, but making his presence known in places where he knows we might be. That must be terrifying. It is, but it's also familiar. He's always used subtle intimidation to maintain control. The difference now is that I understand what he's doing instead of making excuses for it. Emma approached from the living room, holding up her latest artwork. Look what I drew, Mama. It's our new house with the baby's room upstairs. The drawing showed a simple 2-story house with clearly defined rooms, each one labeled in Emma's careful 9-year-old handwriting. Mama's room, Emma's room, baby sister's room, happy kitchen, safe living room. It's beautiful, sweetheart. What makes the kitchen happy and the living room safe? Emma considered this seriously. The kitchen is happy because there's no yelling during dinner, and the living room is safe because nobody throws things or breaks stuff when they get mad. The simple wisdom of her daughter's observation brought tears to Becca's eyes. Emma had internalized the chaos of their former life as normal, but she was already developing new expectations for what home could feel like. Emma, Pat said gently, would you like to help me plant some flowers in the front garden this weekend? The landlord said it was okay to make improvements. Can we plant pink ones for the baby? Mama says she's going to be a girl. We can plant whatever colors you choose. As Emma returned to her drawing, clearly excited about the gardening project, Becca felt a wave of gratitude for the support system that had emerged around them. Pat, Dr. Walsh, Detective Martinez, the domestic violence advocates, even neighbors they'd never met who had witnessed John's threats in the mall parking lot. I keep thinking about that night at the charity gala, Becca said. How humiliated I felt about spilling that drink. How terrified I was of disappointing John. Now I realize that incident was the beginning of everything changing. How so? It was the first time I saw how his need for control extended beyond our private life. He was willing to embarrass Emma publicly, to grip my arm hard enough to leave bruises, all because of an accident that literally no one else cared about. Her phone rang. Dr. Brooks from the hospital. Rebecca, I have your latest test results. Everything looks excellent. Your blood pressure is normal, the baby's heartbeat is strong, and you're showing no signs of the stress complications that brought you to us initially. That's wonderful news. It's more than wonderful. It's remarkable how quickly your body has responded to the reduced stress environment. This baby's going to be born into a much healthier situation than seemed possible a few weeks ago. After ending the call, Becca shared the news with Pat, who smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had recognized abuse long before the victim was ready to acknowledge it. Your body was trying to protect you and the baby all along, Pat observed. Stress-induced labor complications were your system's way of saying the situation was unsustainable. I just wish I'd listened sooner. Emma shouldn't have had to live through months of walking on eggshells, learning that love comes with impossible conditions. You listened when you were ready to hear it. That's how recovery from abuse works. It happens on the victim's timeline, not on anyone else's schedule. Emma's voice called from the living room. Mama, come look. I drew you and the baby at the hospital with Dr. Brooks. Everyone is smiling because the baby is healthy and safe. The drawing showed stick figures with clearly happy expressions, surrounded by hearts and flowers. At the bottom, Emma had written in careful letters, "My family is brave and strong." Looking at her daughter's artwork, Becca realized that reconstruction wasn't just about building a new life. It was about reclaiming the capacity for joy, safety, and authentic connection that narcissistic abuse had systematically eroded. The millionaire CEO husband's empire had completely crumbled, his assets frozen, and his freedom restricted by electronic monitoring. But in this modest safe house, his former victims were discovering that freedom from control was worth more than any luxury he had ever provided. The baby kicked vigorously, as if celebrating her mother's growing strength and the promise of being born into a family where love didn't come with conditions, where safety was prioritized over appearances, and where children could be children instead of tiny adults responsible for managing other people's emotions. The federal courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras as Jonathan Whitmore emerged from his final sentencing hearing, his hands cuffed behind his back and his once perfect facade replaced by the orange jumpsuit of federal prison. Detective Martinez stood beside Becca, who held 2-month-old Hope Catherine Sullivan in her arms while Emma gripped her other hand tightly. 15 years on the federal embezzlement and securities fraud charges, Detective Martinez explained quietly, plus 3 additional years for the domestic violence convictions, to be served concurrently. With the no-contact orders in place, he won't be eligible to request any communication with you or the children for at least 10 years. Emma looked up at her mother with the serious expression she developed over the past few months of therapy and healing. Does this mean we don't have to be scared anymore? It means the adults whose job it is to protect families have done their job very well, Becca replied, borrowing language from Dr. Walsh's sessions. The police, the judges, the lawyers, everyone worked together to make sure our family is safe. Hope stirred in her arms, making the soft cooing sounds that had become the soundtrack of their new life. Born at full term without complications, the baby was healthy and alert, showing none of the stress markers that had characterized Becca's pregnancy during the months with John. Ada Maria Santos approached their small group, her expression satisfied but professional. Mrs. Whitmore, the court has asked if you'd like to make a victim impact statement that will become part of Mr. Whitmore's permanent record. I already gave my statement during the trial, Becca replied. This would be different, a reflection on how the experience has affected you and your children, what you've learned, what you'd want other families in similar situations to know. Becca looked down at Hope's peaceful face, then at Emma, who was quietly drawing in the sketch pad she now carried everywhere. Her daughter's artwork had evolved from dark, angular representations of their old life to bright, flowing images of gardens, houses with clearly defined safe spaces, and families where everyone was smiling. I think I'd like to do that, Becca said. An hour later, she stood at the courthouse podium with Emma beside her and Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms. The courtroom was packed with advocates, survivors of domestic violence, and members of the community who had followed their story from the charity gala incident through John's conviction. Your Honor, Becca began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. I want to talk about something I learned during these past months of legal proceedings and recovery, the difference between love and control. She looked directly at the gallery, speaking not just to the judge, but to the audience of women who might be living in situations similar to what she'd escaped. I spent 2 years believing that my husband's jealousy was evidence of how much he loved me, that his financial control was him taking care of our family, that his anger was just stress from providing for us. I made excuses for behavior that I would never accept if I witnessed it happening to someone else. Emma reached up and squeezed her mother's free hand, offering support with the wisdom of a child who had learned too early about adult struggles and resilience. What I understand now is that love doesn't require you to make yourself smaller to avoid someone else's anger. Love doesn't demand perfection or punish mistakes with emotional cruelty. Love doesn't use children as weapons or make threats about taking them away from the other parent. In the gallery, she could see Pat Henderson nodding, along with several other women from their former social circle who had become unexpected advocates and support system members. My 9-year-old daughter learned to monitor adult moods, to make herself invisible when tensions rose, to feel responsible for managing other people's emotions. No child should have to develop those survival skills in what should be the safest place in their world, their own home. Hope stirred and opened her eyes, looking up at her mother with the clear, trusting gaze of a baby who had never known fear or conditional love. This baby was born into a completely different environment than what I could have provided just 6 months ago. She'll grow up in a home where anger doesn't mean violence, where mistakes are learning opportunities instead of reasons for punishment, where love is demonstrated through kindness and respect rather than control and possession. Becca paused, gathering her thoughts for the most important part of her statement. To other women who might be living with domestic violence, whether it's physical, emotional, financial, or psychological, I want you to know that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing a mother can do. I learned that protecting my children meant more than maintaining appearances or keeping peace at any cost. The courtroom was completely silent. Everyone focused on her words with an intensity that felt both intimidating and empowering. The night Emma got hurt when my former husband lost his temper, I had a choice. I could continue making excuses and accepting his version of events, or I could trust my own perceptions and seek help. The stress-induced labor complications that brought us to the hospital were my body's way of saying that the situation had become unsustainable. Emma tugged gently on Becca's dress and whispered, "You forgot to tell them about the good parts." The innocent comment brought smiles throughout the courtroom and reminded Becca that healing wasn't just about documenting trauma, it was about celebrating recovery and growth. "Emma's right," Becca said, smiling at her daughter. "I should talk about the good parts too, like learning that there are people whose job it is to help families in crisis, that communities can come together to support survivors, that children are incredibly resilient when given the chance to heal in safe environments." She looked directly at Dr. Walsh, Detective Martinez, Pat Henderson, and the other members of their support network. I learned that Emma's wisdom often exceeded my own. She recognized safety and danger more clearly than I did because she hadn't been conditioned to make excuses for unacceptable behavior. This baby will benefit from having a big sister who understands the difference between healthy relationships and controlling ones. Hope made a small sound, and Emma immediately reached up to touch her sister's tiny hand, demonstrating the gentle protectiveness that had characterized their relationship since the birth. Most importantly, I learned that my children deserved a mother who was willing to choose their safety over my comfort, their well-being over maintaining appearances, their future over my fear of change. Judge Thompson leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore, how would you summarize what you'd want other families to understand about domestic violence and recovery?" Becca considered the question carefully, aware that her words might reach people in the situations similar to what she'd escaped. "I'd want them to understand that domestic violence doesn't always look like the dramatic scenes we see in movies. Sometimes it looks like walking on eggshells, making excuses for someone else's behavior, gradually losing confidence in your own perceptions and decision-making abilities." She shifted Hope to her other arm, the baby's peaceful presence a reminder of how much had changed. "But I'd also want them to know that help is available, that recovery is possible, and that children can heal from trauma when they're given consistent safety and support." Emma went from a child who hid in her room during adult conflicts to someone who plants gardens and draws pictures of safe houses and helps take care of her baby sister. Emma beamed with pride at being mentioned so positively in such an important setting. "The system worked for us. Police officers who took domestic violence seriously, doctors who recognized the signs of abuse, lawyers who fought for our safety, judges who prioritized children's well-being over adults' convenience. We're living proof that families can rebuild their lives after domestic violence." As Becca concluded her statement and returned to her seat, the courtroom erupted in supportive applause. Hope opened her eyes wider, seeming to take in the sounds of community approval and encouragement. Later on the courthouse steps, reporters asked about their plans for the future. "Emma starts at her new school next week," Becca explained. "It's a public school with excellent support programs for children transitioning from difficult situations. She's excited about joining their art program and helping with the school garden." "What about you? Will you be returning to work?" "I'm starting a part-time position with the Domestic Violence Resource Center, helping other families navigate the legal and social services systems. My experience as a survivor gives me insight into what works and what doesn't from the victim's perspective." Emma tugged on Becca's sleeve. "Tell them about our house, Mama. We're moving into our own apartment next month. Nothing fancy, but it's in a safe neighborhood with good schools, and Emma gets to help decorate her room however she wants." The questions continued, but Becca found herself thinking about the journey from that night at the charity gala to this moment on the courthouse steps. The spilled drink that had triggered John's explosive anger now seemed like such a small thing, but it had been the crack in the facade that eventually brought down his entire edifice of control. As they walked toward Pat Henderson's car, Emma skipped alongside them, chattering excitedly about her plans for their new apartment and her hopes for making friends at the new school. Hope dozed peacefully, completely unaware of the legal victory that had just secured her safety and future. "Mama," Emma said as they reached the car, "I'm proud of you for being so brave and helping other families too." The simple statement carried the weight of validation Becca had been seeking throughout the entire ordeal. Emma's pride meant more than any legal victory, any media coverage, any community support. "I'm proud of you too, baby. You helped me remember what really matters, keeping our family safe and healthy and happy." As they drove away from the courthouse, Becca reflected on the transformation they'd all undergone. The millionaire CEO husband, who had once controlled every aspect of their lives, was beginning a 15-year federal prison sentence, his empire destroyed and his threats neutralized by the justice system. But his former victims had discovered something more valuable than the luxury he'd provided. They'd found authentic freedom, genuine safety, and the possibility of building relationships based on love and respect rather than fear and control. Hope stirred in her car seat and opened her eyes, looking around at the world with the clear, trusting gaze of a child who would never know conditional love or have to earn safety through perfect behavior. She would grow up understanding that families could be places of genuine refuge, that adults were protectors rather than sources of unpredictable danger, that love was demonstrated through consistent kindness rather than explosive emotions. Emma drew quietly in her sketchpad during the drive, creating yet another image of their future home with its carefully labeled safe spaces and bright colors. At 9 years old, she had survived trauma that would challenge many adults, emerged with remarkable resilience and wisdom, and developed protective instincts toward her baby sister that demonstrated the healing power of authentic love. The story that began with a pregnant wife's humiliation at a charity gala had transformed into something larger, a testament to the possibility of escape from domestic violence, the importance of community support for survivors, and the remarkable capacity of families to heal and thrive when given the opportunity for genuine safety. As they pulled into the driveway of their temporary home, Becca looked at her two daughters and realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not dramatic courtroom scenes or media attention, but quiet moments of safety, small acts of rebuilding, and the daily choice to prioritize well-being over appearances. The millionaire CEO husband's legacy would be federal prison and a cautionary tale about the intersection of wealth and domestic violence. But his former family's legacy would be resilience, recovery, and the wisdom that real love never requires you to make yourself smaller to accommodate someone else's need for control. Justice had been served, but more importantly, life had been reclaimed. And that's where Rebecca's incredible journey ends. Not with revenge or bitterness, but with hope, healing, and the quiet victory of choosing love over fear, safety over status, and her children's well-being over a toxic marriage disguised as perfection. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to the reality of domestic violence hiding behind wealthy facades, or if you found yourself rooting for Rebecca and Emma every step of the way, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Share your thoughts about what surprised you most, what moments hit you hardest, or how this story might change the way you look at the perfect families in your own community. And if you believe stories like this need to be told, stories that shine light on difficult truths while celebrating the incredible resilience of survivors, then please hit that like button to help this reach more people who need to hear Rebecca's message of hope and healing. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because I'll be sharing more powerful true stories that matter. Stories that might just save someone's life or give them the courage to seek help when they need it most. Together, we can break the silence around domestic violence and support survivors on their journey to freedom. Your engagement, your likes, comments, and shares literally help save lives by getting these important stories in front of people who need them. So thank you for listening, thank you for caring, and I'll see you in the next story.